Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Today's topic is a better way to MFA, or multi-factor authentication, as you probably know, best practices to streamline security. So we're hoping to have a pretty interesting and compelling but concise discussion about multi-factor authentication, the the challenges that we all face, and some advice and some tactics that'll help you, do multi-factor authentication better and kind of on a broader scope. So next slide, please. So just some housekeeping before we dive into the cool stuff. If you have any questions, send them in the chat and we'll get to them. If we aren't able to get to them today for whatever reason, we will certainly follow up with you individually. Next slide. So here's a few upcoming events that you could attend if you like. They're all really relevant, particularly in the security, identity, device management space. I'd like to call particular attention to that second one, IT Hour. That's tomorrow at this same time. No, it's an hour earlier than this, tomorrow, and we will be specifically covering multi-factor authentication in more depth than we will today. So if you find this interesting, you find this useful, and you want to go the next level deeper, be sure to join us tomorrow, and we'll take care of you there. Next slide. All right, so who we're talking to today. I'm Todd Peterson. We're all on the product team. I'm just the host. You won't hear from me again until the end, but the guys that know what we're talking about, the smart guys that will give you all the valuable stuff, are Dave Madrid and Eric Avigdor. They'll both provide a lot of insight, so pay attention, ask lots of questions, and with that, we'll turn it over to Dave.
Hey everybody, just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Dave Madrid. I'm a senior technical product manager here at JumpCloud, and looking forward to talking to you all about MFA today.
Eric, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, some technical challenges. How could we start a webinar without some technical challenges? So hey, I'm Eric Avigdor. I run product management for identity and access management in JumpCloud. And I think with that, Todd, can we get started?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, so we're here to talk about multi-factor authentication, which we will shorten to MFA across the entire discussion now today, just to keep it brief. We're going to talk about some basic fundamentals. We're pretty confident that our great audience understands why multi-factor is needed and what multi-factor is. We're going to go briefly through some basics and then really cover challenges in deploying multi-factor, what options you have. Different options that are out there on the market, different technologies have different benefits, pros and cons. We'll go through that. And we're hoping to also show a little bit of how you could be deploying multi-factor in different ways and best practices. We hope you enjoy it. So let's get started. So quickly, who we are. JumpCloud is a company that has been serving the directory space for since 2014. We'll talk about what directory means in a few seconds. 5,000 customers, 180,000 organizations actually using the product in many, many different ways. We operate in over 160 different countries with currently actually more than 800 employees. What we do at JumpCloud is we unify IT and security infrastructure by doing several things. We cover the identity lifecycle management portion of things. So anything you can imagine from bringing in users, centrally managing users across many different IT infrastructure environments, managing access to those IT resources, which could be devices which you would want to log on to, SaaS applications, infrastructure, VPNs, and many different IT resources that you would want your users to have access to on-prem and in the cloud. And we do that in a modern way, which is what we call our Open Directory Platform. And what that means is that JumpCloud sees itself as the next generation Active Directory. We are the cloud form of what Active Directory was always supposed to be, a directory that includes within it user identities, device management capabilities, a directory of resources, IT resources, a directory of connections of how these identities and how these users connect and access these different IT resources, and a directory of events, which is logging and showing how different events have impact on security stance, and on and on. So with that said, I want to pause there and I want to move on to the core of this session, which is multi-factor authentication and why we love it so much. And before we talk about multi-factor authentication, let's talk about why we even need that. So who loves passwords? Show of hands. I mean, I don't love passwords, but let's talk about different personas. Users, to say the least, do not like passwords. They do not like passwords because they tend to, and we tend to forget those passwords. And in order to solve that problem of forgetting passwords, what we tend to do in order to re-love our passwords is choose the same password across many different environments and resources. And that is a pretty bad idea. So we don't like passwords, and what we don't like even more than that is when different applications or administrators force us to use complex passwords, which makes it even worse. My kids don't like that. I don't like that. It is difficult. Admins, they don't love passwords even more than we don't love passwords. IT admins are day in and day out challenged with password resets, password reuse problems, which introduce security challenges. So on one hand, it challenges small IT teams, especially in the SME space and the small to medium enterprise space, and even in the small to medium business space. It challenges IT teams with many, sometimes hundreds of password resets per day, which really spend the IT bandwidth on the wrong problem. And obviously introduces significant security risks. However, hackers love passwords. They love them for the exact same reasons that we don't. It's an easy win. Passwords are used across many different resources, both personal as well as corporate resources. It is an easy way into sensitive and important data that hackers can have access to. And we're going to talk a little bit about how and how multi-factor solves that exact problem. It is a well-known fact. Any analyst will quote a slightly different number. They always range between 80% and 90%, but based on our research, we see that roughly 81% of hacking-related breaches use a weak or stolen password. So if your password is I love you or 1234 or first name, last name with a 1 and an exclamation mark, that is not a good idea. That's a weak password, and you will be breached. It's only a question of time. Stolen password is another issue, but let's go through different ways of, let's just see how easy it is to actually obtain usernames and passwords. So many different passwords attack are out there that are employed by different levels of hackers at different levels of capabilities. Credential stuffing is one. Credential stuffing is basically a hacker that has access to a pool, to a database of credentials. There are many out there on the dark web. And once a hacker has your username and password, they will stuff that credential into many different applications, SaaS applications. So those could be your LinkedIn account, your Facebook account. Once that credential is confirmed, that credential can be tested against your corporate account, which is most probably firstname.lastname@domain.com. That is one easy attack. Another easy attack, which we've all been exposed to in the past few years, especially since COVID, this became a really significant challenge for IT teams, is phishing and snitching. Phishing is when someone is imposing to be someone else. I frequently am targeted. I get emails from my CEO, Raj, saying, hey, it's Raj, please send me your password for this and that application, or please click on this link and do XYZ, or please pay this bill for this vendor. We track that across our customer base, across our prospect base, and we see many phishing attacks that are easy ways into corporate credentials. Smishing is exactly the same thing, just using that same technique through SMS. Password spray is an interesting one. Password spray is a technique where we obtain a large list of usernames, which is fairly easy. Many usernames are easy to guess, and we spray those easy to guess passwords like I love you, 1234, and many others. There's a continuously updated list of 10 frequently used passwords that many organizations maintain. You can spray them across different websites, and you can easily get access to sensitive information. And cyber extortion, I can tell you from my personal experience, I've been a victim of cyber extortion. Having said that, with the years of experience in this space, it was very clear that this is cyber extortion, and I knew what to do with that. However, most of the employees of most organizations, actually there is a statistic saying that between 50 to 60% of employees of most organizations will fall victim to cyber extortion and will either provide their credentials or pay in Bitcoin, in whatever, the coin of your choice, but would fall victim to cyber extortion. We can go on and on, right? The list goes on. Keystrokes logging, dumpster diving is an interesting one, but very real one. Now that we are moving back into the office, insider threat is a significant threat, physical recon, brute force attacks, and much more. There is a solution for that. It is a known fact that if you deploy multi-factor authentication, you are most likely going to be safe at a level of 99.9%. So you are reducing significantly the likelihood of your company being compromised when deploying multi-factor authentication. So we have a silver bullet. That sounds great. Challenge is we need to talk about how. Because it is very easy to say, let's deploy multi-factor authentication. The challenging part starts now. How do we actually do that? And this dilemma is very relevant for folks who haven't deployed yet multi-factor, but is even more relevant for companies who have deployed and are returning back to some of these dilemmas that we're going to talk about. So if we plot different multi-factor authentication technologies on a chart that spans convenience and level of security, you would say that passwords, and this is debatable, are both non-convenient and not secure. Some claim that passwords are somewhat convenient. If you choose the same password, I would say that's okay. However, if you use the same password, I would even drop that level of security below this chart. So let's assume for a moment that passwords are just non-convenient and not secure because you need to use many of them. One way of deploying multi-factor, whoops, wrong way on the slides. One way of deploying multi-factor is something that had started many years ago, which is sending one-time password through SMS or through email. We know, because NIST has told us that, the fact, and because we've researched it, that SMS is very insecure. SMS is a very convenient way to share one-time passwords, which are not static passwords. It's a very convenient way. It is somewhat more secure than using password. It is not as secure as other multi-factor authentication options. There are many ways that that can be actually breached. Email can be slightly more secure, but once again, email can be prone to other password-based attacks if email itself is not protected with multi-factor authentication. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem. If I don't have multi-factor, how do I gain access to my email? So if we want to talk about multi-factor factors, authentication factors that are both convenient and secure, we can actually start talking about one-time password. And one-time password can be deployed in many different ways. I'd say the ways that are most used today within the security industry are either physical one-time password tokens, where you press a button and you have your one-time password, or you have just a display rotating time-based one-time passwords, or you have an app on a phone, which you can then multi-factor into any application with. So you click on your mobile app, you have a one-time password, and you log in. A better way of deploying multi-factor, which is more secure because it uses private key cryptography. So instead of using only hash functions and symmetric cryptography, we're also using asymmetric cryptography, is using push authentication using mobile phone applications. There are many of them out there on the market today. JumpCloud does have, we do have our own push authentication JumpCloud Protect application. And basically the user experience, as we all know, is I'm trying to access the application that I'm trying to access, be that Office 365 or Salesforce, and I get a notification on my phone saying, hey, this user is trying to access from this city or country. Do you approve? I hit approve and I am logged in. Very convenient, very efficient, very secure. There are many other ways that many other authentication factors we can talk about, but I think we all get the idea. Let's talk for a moment, let's segue and talk about Windows Hello, because this has been a good dilemma on the market for a while now. And I think we'll be talking about Windows Hello, but overall, I think the same type of dilemma is a question we ask ourselves on the Mac world about Touch ID and Face ID and the Apple world, right? So the question becomes, is platform authentication or an authenticator that exists on the platform that is built into the platform itself, is that truly multi-factor authentication? So for those who haven't used yet Windows Hello, Windows Hello is a credential that Microsoft built into the Windows login flow. There are two versions, Windows Hello, which is the consumer version, Windows Hello for business, which is the more enterprisey version. Similar but different in how they are implemented. Windows Hello at the end of the day helps you get rid of your password. So instead of logging on to your Windows machine, Windows 10 machine with a username and password, you would now be prompted to either enter your PIN, which is very different from a password. If you'd want to talk about why a PIN is very different than a password, although these sound the same, meet us on IT Hours tomorrow. We'll be talking about that in detail. PINs and passwords are significantly different. Or you could be logging on to your Windows Hello and Windows device with your biometrics, so with your fingerprint, face recognition, and more. Another option would be logging on with a security key, a FIDO-based, WebAuthn-based security key, which can be plugged into your USB port and you log on to Windows. So you ask yourself, is Windows Hello multi-factor? Because if it is, that is great. I can log on to my device and I am good to go. The challenge with Windows Hello starts with the definition of multi-factor authentication. So multi-factor authentication means you are authenticating, you're proving who you are with multiple factors, with something you have, which could be a token, a corporate card, a smart card, your phone, right? That is something you have. Something you know could be a password or a PIN, or in some cases, even knowledge-based authentication. And something you are, which could be a fingerprint, iris scanners in some very sophisticated cases, facial recognition, and more. So a combination of any one of these, when you have more than one factor, is considered multi-factor. So think about Windows Hello. When I am using Windows Hello, I'm trying to access my Windows device and IT resources accessed by that Windows device, basically by logging on with an authenticator that is on the access device itself. My fingerprint sensor is on the access device itself. The PIN that I'm typing in is on the access device itself. Many regulations do not consider that multi-factor authentication. So both from a security perspective, from a separation of factors security perspective, and from the perspective of audit and compliance, Windows Hello is a great user experience, which does not comply with the definition of multi-factor authentication. It is, I would say, great to use as part of a multi-factor authentication scheme when bundled with additional capabilities. So just a point for further thought and discussion later on. So let's talk about why can multi-factor authentication be difficult? Because if this was easy, we would see multi-factor authentication deployed in every single company, and it should be very simple to actually deploy. So let's talk about the challenges, and let's talk about how to overcome those challenges. I would split the challenges into 3 buckets. At the bottom, what you see is the foundations. When you want to choose multi-factor authentication for your users, you need to choose a factor which is appropriate for the level of security you want to achieve for a given resource. So if there is no one size fit all, right? There is no, we need the most secure factor for everything. That doesn't make sense. When a company chooses a multi-factor authentication, an IT team needs to tailor the level of security of that authentication form factor to the sensitivity of the crown jewels or the IT resource that is being accessed. When we talk about multi-factor, one of the biggest problems is we need to deploy it to more than one environment. That's another challenge. How do we choose a factor or a token or an authentication mechanism which could actually work with many IT resources? And we'll get to that in a second. A second category of challenges is how do I make it easy for users to even start using multi-factor? How do I onboard these users? How do I enroll them with tokens and with credentials for those authentication factors? And a third category of challenges is that factor that I choose needs to fit into my work environment, and I need to manage change so my users actually adopt multi-factor authentication and adopt it in a way that is secure and healthy for my IT organization. So I'll give you an example. It would be brilliant if anyone could use a corporate phone in order to use a push app for push authentication, in order to MFA into any IT resource. However, what if you are, and I'll give an extreme example, working in a lab, which does not allow you to carry a phone? I had customers which are working on an oil rig where you, for reasons that are obvious, safety reasons, you cannot carry a phone onto an oil rig. But think about even a more simple use case, which is I am working in a call center, I am not allowed to use a phone. I am working in a job where I am not willing to use my personal phone for a corporate app. So in that scenario, you may want to consider a factor which is not a phone. And we can go on and on, but going back to basics, there is no one size fits all. Moving on. One of the biggest challenges in the multi-factor authentication space, and this is a struggle I see with many prospects we talk to, and even many organizations that have already deployed multi-factor for a single resource. So let's say you have had a challenge in the past where you wanted to secure your VPN access. Everybody went out on lockdown. Big problem. We need everyone now to authenticate through VPN, through any one of given VPNs, and you have deployed multi-factor with JumpCloud or with Duo or with Okta. And you've deployed it for your VPN, and a year passed, and suddenly you realize that that single solution doesn't cover everything that you need to cover. Because, for example, now you would want to allow access to your Office 365 environment or Salesforce application or ServiceNow, something that is sensitive enough for an IT team or a security team to wake up one day and say, hey, we need multi-factor authentication for that resource. Maybe an environment is sensitive enough to say, we need to add multi-factor for our device login when users log into their device because their device is a gateway to everything else, or because their device contains sensitive data on the device itself. We can go on and on, right? We can talk about VPN access, we can talk about VDI access. If you're accessing your Citrix or VMware environments, we can talk about accessing SaaS applications. We can talk about accessing on-prem applications. And we could even go to the resolution of talking about, I'm going back into my office. I want my users to have access to Wi-Fi. I want them to multi-factor into that Wi-Fi so I know it is actually them and not someone eavesdropping on my Wi-Fi. How do I do that? How do I introduce a solution which is not a long list of vendors that each solve a single problem and becomes a massive problem, which is not a single pane of glass, which now requires me to manage access in different systems for different environments. This is where we circle back to the JumpCloud vision. When you choose multi-factor authentication for your environments, we would suggest looking at platforms which are open, platforms which would allow you to manage identity lifecycle on one hand and access management on the other hand. You want to know who your users are. You want to know which roles your users are. You want to know where they are located. You want to know a whole long list of things about your users before you allow them access to sensitive data. Once you know that, you can decide which authentication factor is appropriate for a given application or a given IT resource. You should choose a platform similar to what we coined as an open directory platform, which allows you to deploy different form factors for different users, because as we mentioned, different users will have different needs. Those could be one-time password tokens, mobile apps, those could be certificates, those could be, in some cases, PINs, in some cases, facial recognition or biometrics. There are many ways you can authenticate users into different environments, and you would want to employ different ways for different users. And what you really want to get to eventually is a situation where you solve the most sophisticated approach to multi-factor authentication, which is balancing between user experience on one hand and security on the other hand. So we want to introduce multi-factor authentication, but we know we cannot and we should not force users to use multi-factor 20 times a day. If we would require users to do that 20 times a day, that would be very inconvenient. So you want to introduce conditional access. And at this point, what I'd really like to do is hand it over to my colleague, Dave, who will walk us through how we actually make this happen.
All right, thanks, Eric. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to go through just a few examples of how JumpCloud makes this super easy for you all. So, so this first example is MFA on devices, and JumpCloud basically makes it really easy by just making it a one-click option. Here, you can go into each device. In that first image there, you can enable MFA on the device for all users. We also have the ability to select many devices, all devices, however you want to do it. You can target specific devices. And that's it. And when you do that, when the user logs in, they enter their username, password, and they're sent a push notification, for example, if you've enabled that factor on your org. Also notice in the middle, as Eric said, you want to give your users the ability to choose which authenticator they're using. So down here on the bottom, they could also choose to use a one-time password as well as instead of a push, or any other factors. Eric mentioned several others. Like you could enable those on your orgs and give them options for the factors that you feel you can support for your org or best for your users. All right, let's go. I want to show the now for applications. Eric mentioned Office 365. In this case, I want to target MFA for access to AWS, for example. JumpCloud makes this super easy. I could specify that exact application. I could choose all applications if I wanted, or I could target a subset of multiple applications. And in addition, we allow you to target all users or select specific user groups. In this case, we've specified the administrator's user group. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, the drop down there is you select to allow authentication with MFA. And that's it. That's super simple. I could save this policy. Now everybody in the administrator's group is going to be prompted for MFA when accessing AWS. But I want to point out here, like sort of a pro tip, right? You see the conditions section there. Another great way to protect your resources is just to use conditional access policies. You can use, device posture conditions here, such as full disk encryption, OS versioning, browser versioning, browser version, anti-malware running, things like that. You could target, managed devices. Is the user accessing this resource from a managed device? Are they in a trusted network? You could also look at things like user risk score, or things that fill into user risk score, such as like geovelocity. Have they logged in from San Francisco today and Singapore in 10 minutes later? Things like that. Like, those are things you could look for in the platform. All right, so once I've saved this policy, go ahead and go to the next slide there for me, Eric. Just so the end user experience, they would access AWS through the URL. They get redirected to JumpCloud. They enter a username, password. They're prompted to send a push notification in this case, because push is their most recent. Push is the JumpCloud Protect is their most recent authenticator that they use. But we also give them the ability to change that, right? Like in this case, we have the ability to use a different authenticator app if you're using Google Authenticator or something else, or if you had WebAuthn enabled. Eric mentioned Windows Hello or YubiKey. If you had programmable hardware tokens, you give them the option to select one of those. And in this case, they selected push. They get a push notification, and they approve the push, and they're allowed into their resource. So super simple, super flexible solution there for configuring MFA on your application. All right, now, what about Radius? Don't forget about Radius, right? You've configured MFA on a device. You've got, you configured MFA on your applications that you're interested in. How about Radius? We make that super simple. It's a one toggle enable MFA on your Wi-Fi with one click there, and you save that. And now with JumpCloud, with push notifications, as soon as they're connected to their Wi-Fi, username and password, they're automatically sent a push notification here. We also support TOTP, but this could be configured for other authenticators as well. All right, next slide. Eric, you want to go over the recommendations here?
Sure. So summarizing everything we've just talked about, and we'll try going back and forth and sharing different ideas. We talked about the challenges with multi-factor, right? We talked about it is important. It's a significant decision in organizations' life, which how to deploy MFA. So we want to give you a few sweet nuggets on what should we consider when deciding how to deploy multi-factor. The first one for me, and this is probably where every company should start, even if multi-factor is already deployed, is prioritize. A first question that needs to be asked is, what are my crown jewels? What are my key resources? What are the applications which are truly high risk? High risk both from a compliance and audit standpoint, which you do not want to fail, obviously. And what are those that, if breached, could potentially bring down the company or loss of IP, right? So where is that most sensitive data, which we really need to cover first with multi-factor authentication? Dave, do you want to talk about appropriate authentication?
Yeah, and as Eric mentioned earlier, like choosing the appropriate authenticators for your users, right? You've really got to take inventory. Where are your users at? What type of users do you have? Are they able? Is an OTP okay for them? Are you wanting to send, maybe use like hardware tokens or security keys, YubiKeys, et cetera? Do you have the budget for that? What's ideal? Are we talking about lab administrators? You have high security in certain areas and not in others. You really have to think about the frictionless authenticators. Who do you want? Which authenticators do you want to use or have your users use? You really need to think about that. So,
and then another point that sometimes is, at least in many IT teams, thought about a separate practice, which is multi-factor and single sign-on. Those should be bundled into one single security thought process. When deploying multi-factor correctly, multi-factor is an entry point to proving who a user is, and from that point on, access should be easy. Access should be seamless. users should be single signed on to most applications. So the first entry level into that combination is really deploying multi-factor for many SaaS applications and allowing single sign-on in that browser session between different SaaS applications. And I think in a moment they will show you how to balance that best user experience, but still have security when you need it.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is, use conditional access, right? And balance your user experience with your security requirements that you have by doing so. For example, you could potentially relax MFA if a user is coming from a trusted device on a trusted network, and maybe they're trying to access a resource that maybe is less risk prone. You could relax in that case with conditional access, or you could step up authentication and require MFA based on their device posture, their risk posture, etc. So conditional access is a really powerful way to, it's similar to like complementing MFA with single sign-on. Like you can relax MFA there, you can step it up. Conditional access is a great way to do that.
And I think just to summarize on this last point, if you think about everything we've just talked about, so prioritizing resources, choosing the right authenticator, you might have a mix of those, adding on single sign-on, balancing that with conditional access. What makes that possible is centrally managing multi-factor from one single platform, right? Deploying a mix of a Microsoft authenticator with Okta, with Duo, with JumpCloud, that won't give you the single pane of glass and that ease of management that is needed. And it also makes it really difficult in that scenario to truly understand your security stance and where you may have gaps. So centrally managing multi-factor across all IT resources, across all users, is very, very fundamental for a successful MFA deployment. And I think with that, Todd, do you want to kick off a poll?
Yep. Thanks, guys. That was really interesting from the amount of questions we've got. It looks like we have some more things to talk about in a minute. So there's a quick poll that's going to come up on the screen. If each of you could take a second to provide us your answer, we'll then get to Q&A right afterwards. While we're doing that, I'll just remind you about the IT hour tomorrow. It's 11:30 Eastern time. The link is in your chat there, and we'll go much deeper on the things we talked about today. We'll get as far into the weeds as any of you want to. So, you're welcome to join that if you're available, but we do repeat that every single Friday. Just tomorrow we'll have multi-factor as a focus. All right, looks like we had plenty of response in the poll. Let's go back to the deck, Eric.
Okay.
There we go. Next slide will say questions, I think. Maybe not. There we go. So now we can do the questions. Let me pull up some that were brought here. All right, so this one goes back to the very start. It's for Eric. In the cyber extortion experience, do you report it to the police or authorities?
So that really depends. My advice would be depending on the severity of cyber extortion, the first thing you probably should be doing is reporting to your security team. That is the most important part. Your security team, your IT security team will know, your CISO will know how to guide you on what to do. So it really depends on policy. In some cases, yes, it would be wise to report to authorities. In many cases, identity theft cases, there is actually a government website where you can fill in a report on that as well. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Next one is why does JumpCloud not ask for MFA in Windows each and every time when there's a reboot to the system, which is what's happening in Linux and Mac?
That's a great question. And I think so. First, let's start from technicalities. Mac and Windows are designed differently. With Mac, a password is mandatory on a reboot in order to unlock the key vault. So there's no way around that. That is why this is mandatory on Mac. It is possible to require multi-factor on Windows login. That is a choice that IT teams have. There's a way that you could be logging in with multi-factor or with multi-factor combined with passwords or with Windows Hello. There are many different options that you could choose in a Windows environment.
Next one is multi-device authentication available with JumpCloud?
Multi-device authentication. So if I'm reading the question correctly, the question is whether you can authenticate with multiple devices. Dave, do you want to take that?
I'm trying to understand what the intent of that question is. I'm not sure what is meant by multi-device authentication.
Maybe we can cover that tomorrow.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Send us some clarification, whoever asked that question, and we'll get into it. And if we're unable to hit it here, we will certainly respond to you individually with the answer.
So I'll give two different answers, which may answer the question. If you're asking about accessing from multiple devices, for example, accessing from your personal Windows device versus your corporate MacBook, then yes, that you can use multi-factor in both environments. If the question is using two different authentication factors, that is also possible in different scenarios.
Cool, good. All right, are there plans to add automation to enable device multi-factor for conditional policies based on user groups?
I can take this one. Yes, there are plans. So we're planning to move configuration for MFA on a device into conditional access policies. So if the question is really around like, hey, can I set up access policies on devices by user group? Yes, and we're also planning to include device groups to those as well when we do that. So you'll be able to configure MFA by user group and device group. So if that's what you mean by automation, then yes, that is on the roadmap.
Awesome. Are there plans to enable the first authentication factor to be Windows Hello or Apple biometrics?
So let me change so we can actually see ourselves and not the slide. So yes, absolutely yes. We are planning on introducing both Windows Hello options and Touch ID in different scenarios for different IT resources. And you will hear about that more in the upcoming roadmap webinar, which will be coming soon.
Cool. All right, this one, we just had to implement MFA for systems for cybersecurity insurance and are trying not to police the systems. Would you say single sign-on is an alternate or better route opposing MFA?
I love the question. So MFA, I think we talked about this a little bit. We touched on this earlier, but just diving slightly deeper. MFA and SSO should not contradict each other. MFA and SSO are complementary technologies that should be used in tandem. MFA is the way that you prove who you are. SSO is a way of making access easy. If you think about it, SSO deployed without multi-factor is actually not really a good idea, because if I have stolen, it's actually in some cases even worse than using many passwords, because if I have found a way to retrieve your password and now I have access to the entire network and every single application, that is not great. So multi-factor should definitely be used in tandem with SSO.
Cool. Do conditional MFA policies allow for geofencing on a per application basis?
Yeah, they do. Today in JumpCloud, you can configure, you can target specific applications and only grant access from certain countries or deny access from certain countries. So today we definitely certainly have that today. Yep.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, that's all the questions we had, which was actually quite a lot of questions, so that was great. Thank you everyone for your participation. Dave, Eric, thank you for the very valuable insight, and don't forget about the IT hours tomorrow. If you want to go deeper, if you're not able to attend that, email us, reach out. We'd be happy to talk through this as much or as little as you want. But as you can tell, we're excited about multi-factor. We think it's important, and we think there's a right way to do it, and we can certainly help you do it in the best possible way for you. So thanks for attending, and we'll be in touch.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.